Hello and welcome back to an episode of Generation Films. My name is American Ben, and today we're going to tell you how to defeat the 4 major Xeno races in Warhammer 40K. This is a compilation video, which is buying me time to finish a video I'm doing on Squid Game for my other channel, Generation Ochi. So if you're interested in seeing that, go subscribe over there, and thanks for putting up with this today. Now, I stopped this series short of covering the Tau and Drukhari because, well, it just wasn't doing that well, to be honest. But I mean, we covered the Asuryani, even if we missed their sociopathic brethren, and the Tau, I mean, here's how to defeat them. Do literally anything. So for today, we're going to teach you strategies for taking down the Craft World Eldar, the Tyranids, the Necrons, and of course, my boys, dem baddies, the Orkz. Let's start with the Space Elves. The Craft World Eldar, that is, the Asuryani, if you will, those elitist Xeno-elfin psychic bastards. Our first strategy is, of course, temptation. Long story short, many millennia ago, the Eldari had a massive empire which spanned the width of Rian Johnson's ego. God damn it, Alan, stop trolling my scripts. Anyway, yeah, it was a big empire, but its success led to hedonism, and eventually the Eldari fell into sin, which led to the near extinction of their race and the birth of the Chaos God Slaanesh, aka Slaanesh, aka She Who Thirsts, but going off that picture, Me Who Thirsts. Sorry, I'll shut up. Basically, Slaanesh now haunts the Eldari from the warp, feeding on their energy. The Eldari find themselves so vulnerable to Slaanesh because of their tendency towards extremes. The same mind power which has led them to high highs is also capable of bringing them to low lows, and Slaanesh feeds on their strong emotions and, by extension, their souls. What I'm getting at here should be fairly obvious. Defeating the Eldari is best done by tempting them to break their strict code, which keeps them balanced, and thus see them fall to pleasure and pain. Thus, to simply fight the Eldar head-on may prove fruitless. Instead, providing them with vice and riches could do more to fell them than any las cannon ever could. Our second strategy should seem like a no-go, as in, don't go after the Craft Worlds, and I partly think doing so is a bad idea as well. They, of course, are built on a foundation of Wraithbone, a psychoactive element which gives the ships all sorts of psychic and magical abilities. Humans stand very little chance of understanding the first thing about Craft Worlds, and given the whole magical energy infused into them thing, and their incomprehensibly massive size, it seemed wise to maybe stay the hell away from them. However, remember the whole temptation dynamic we just talked about? Well, as the Eldari are liable to extremes because they're kind of like super sensitive, erratic, mood-swinging, creative types, they have really high highs and really low lows, as I said before. And in that vein, they can be really confident in themselves, as they often are, or really unsure about everything. What I'm saying is that while the Eldari seem super composed, casting a seed of doubt in their minds could trigger the unraveling of their entire race. Thus, I may suggest that given the isolation of each craft world from another, the Imperial Navy may stand some chance of overcoming a craft world with some shock and awe tactics. If an Imperial battle fleet is able to surprise and overwhelm a craft world, the resident Asuryani could be caught off guard and end up shaken to the point of downswing in terms of their mood and confidence. Then the ripples of one craft world falling, and the doubt that exposed it could be spread psychically to other craft worlds throughout the galaxy. So while I do want to advocate for mental health awareness, yes, I'm basically asking that we use the Eldari's depression against them. To be fair, they do use our mortality against us. On the back of that last strategy, our next strategy is simply to target Eldari leaders. Again, what seems like a highly advanced and indestructible society at first glance is actually somewhat fragile, as though boasting powerful technology, small flaws can quickly overrun their empire. If the Eldari see their leaders, or perhaps even better yet, their best seers fall, they again may fall to doubt, or wonder if the narratives fed to them about the supremacy of their race are true, or if they have been lied to. Where Orkz and Tyranids kind of have no emotion, Eldari do. And they can get shaken if the top of their hierarchy falls. Our fourth strategy is an obvious one. develop and implement anti-psychic technology. Yes, the Eldari don't love the warp more than anyone else. I mean, Slaanesh, their personal devil, resides in there. But they are still psychic and can make their way through it using a series of paths called the Webway, which, yes, like me, has somewhat fallen into disrepair, but is still serviceable to some degree. I'm rambling, but unlike the other races I've covered in this series, we can't just lead the Eldari into the warp and hope they get lost and swallowed up by Slaanesh. Moreover, if humans are going to overcome them, then they'll have to have tech capable of hindering the Eldari's unmatched psychic prowess. For instance, if the shock and awe plan is going to work, it's probably going to need some element of surprise, which is sort of difficult to accomplish when one's enemy knows you're coming simply by looking into their own minds. This may seem like a rather simple and broad suggestion, but A, like I said, and coming back slow here, and B, it's part of an important larger initiative I have to shit on the Adeptus Mechanicus and hopefully motivate them to get their act together so humans don't go extinct. Our final strategy is an oldie but a goodie. Ye old Warp Rift. Yes, we can hope to lead the Eldari into the warp to their doom. After all, they're psychic and probably too smart to do that in the first place. However, letting the energies of the warp out would be devastating to the Eldari. The forces of chaos, specifically the armies of Slaanesh, would be set free to feed on the Eldar directly within real space, a dynamic which no doubt would spell the end of the Eldari race. Now, this is almost too cruel of a strategy to suggest. I only raise it as a last resort measure if the Eldari get so full of themselves that they decide to start wraith-boning the galaxy. But at that point, they may be falling towards hedonism and collapse again anyway. You know, too much wraith-boning. But still, poor Eldari. They can't win without losing. Also, I've heard that warp rifts are kind of hard to clean up and could lead to the destruction of the entire galaxy, so yeah, tread lightly when opening them up. The Orkz are actually a Xeno race that's conceivably defeatable, unlike the Necrons and Tyranids. I'm not saying they're a walk in the park, also known as the Tau. I'm saying it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that the Imperium of Man could bring down the Greenskin Horde. Now, if you have a social life, then you may not know that the Orkz are a biologically engineered species. They were created by the Old Ones, aka the Brain Boys, a precursor reptilian race some 60 million Terran years ago. The Old Ones created the Orkz, who themselves were originally known as the Krork, to fight the Necrons during the War in Heaven. Truth be told, the Orkz don't cut it against the Necrons, but to be fair, not even Chuck Norris could take down the Necrontyr. Slime Marbo could, though. That said, the Orkz are a very formidable Xeno race, perhaps the strongest intelligent, though I use that term lightly, race in the Milky Way galaxy, and the human empire has suffered greatly at their Thus, let's consider some ways the Orkz could be brought down. The first method is antifungal technology. Orkz are built to survive in any environment as they have a partial fungal makeup. They're basically part mushroom, part Shrek. When they invade a planet, they don't adapt to it. On the contrary, they adapt the planet to them. They release fungal spores on the surface of planets which take root in the ground and transform said planets into orc ecosystems. Using this incredible biological survival mechanism they're endowed with, orcs can survive just about anywhere, from toxic death worlds to Khorne's anus, and this is a problem. Not just for the bowels of a certain chaos god, but for all of humanity, because it's near impossible to find an environment within which orcs won't quickly gain the upper hand. This is why any intelligent plan of action in taking on the Orkz would involve developing technology that can counteract their fungal survival mechanism, which is also how orcs reproduce, by the way. Inhibiting the orc life cycle with some sort of antifungal cream, or okay, fine, bomb, could be the secret to finally taking them down. Our second method is something that one should not do in taking on the Orkz: underestimate them. I think given the fact that orcs aren't the brightest of the sentient races in the galaxy, humans are often tempted to simply believe they can defeat them by out-strategizing them. Now, it is true that humans have historically been able to outthink the orcs and back them into traps of all sorts, but often this hasn't been enough to claim victory. This brings to mind the Thrasos disaster, which took place in year 928 of the 41st millennium. On the planet Thrasos, a coalition of Space Marine chapters, including the Iron Knights and Liberators, attempted to halt an aggressive orc advance. The Space Marines successfully lured the orcs onto a refinery platform, at which point Tech Marines destroyed the bridges, linking the platform to the mainland. Then, Space Marine kill teams swooped in to take out the trapped orcs. Indeed, thousands of orcs died in the battle, but so did hundreds of space marines, as though operating from a positional disadvantage, the orcs fought back with unrelenting fervor. Eventually, orc reinforcements showed up, and ultimately the orc persevered. And thus, sometimes tactics aren't enough against the orcs because they're resilient, fiery, and, well, have incredible numbers. But perhaps most importantly of all, they're warlike, born to love the fight, and so breaking their will is often a futile endeavor. They can overcome superior tactics with raw aggression, which, by the way, is a real strategy sometimes employed in war and sport. Method number 3 is to isolate them. To reiterate, orcs are an intelligent race, but they're simple-minded. They don't deeply ponder their actions, they just do. They see an enemy, they attack, and thus, as I also mentioned before, it's not too hard to outsmart them or trick them. Therefore, strategies which involve manipulating them should certainly be employed, because doing so is not too tall of an ask. As far as isolating them goes, well, orcs can collectively generate a psychic field which grows stronger as more orcs enter within the perimeter of the field. It is this field which endows orcs with a range of powers and abilities. Simply said, the more numbers orcs have at the ready, the stronger they are collectively. However, on their own, individual orcs have no psychic power, and they're much less capable. Thus, employing strategies which at the very least create distance between orc factions would help to collectively weaken the orcs on the battlefield. Method number 4 is to gather the orcs in one spot, which of course completely contradicts my previous suggestion. Here's the thing. Yeah, orcs become stronger when they're together, but they also tend to use that strength on each other. If the entire orc race becomes united, the galaxy would probably be doomed. But that will never come to pass because orcs are always steeped in internecine conflict. Orc tribes wage war against one another for dominance and to prove their might. Orcs often live short lives because they spend most of their time in combat, and oft they lose their lives at the hands of fellow orcs. One can imagine that if a larger population of orcs were confined to a single star system, they might wipe each other out. Method number 5 is to target the odd boys. Odd boys are orcs who are born with special information programmed into their DNA, which is released into their minds when they reach maturity. This information allows these orcs to specialize in specific tasks beyond fighting, such as developing and repairing weapons and tech, or healing battle wounds. Given the orcs' numbers and rate of reproduction, attempting to take all of them on in head-to-head battle is a fruitless undertaking. In general, it's not smart to fight orcs head-on. However, if humans plan on engaging them in combat, then they should attempt to target precision attacks against odd boys. Without this special class of orcs, the larger orc population would be rendered somewhat vulnerable. That said, even a standard orc has the genetically coded knowledge necessary to maintain his weapons. So without odd boys along with them in battle, they wouldn't be totally useless. At least not immediately. Method number 6 is to use orcs' psychic ability against them. As I explained before, orc psychic power is only effective when orcs are together in large numbers, but when they are, it is a hell of a strong psychic power. Through this collective psychic connection, whatever orcs believe to be true, mostly in regard to their technology, will become true. A popular example of this from the lore is that orc rockets painted yellow create bigger explosions than rockets painted other colors, simply because orcs collectively believe this to be true. So my question is, given orcs' relative dimness of mind, why wouldn't humans attempt to manipulate them into believing something is true that would endanger them? For instance, they could convince orcs that their bombs only explode when thousands of orcs are in proximity of the explosion, which of course would lead to a massive suicide event. Now, I haven't really worked out how best to employ this strategy. After all, I've never seen it proposed before, and I've just kind of come up with it here. And I also know that the biggest problem with it is that orcs are going to believe things they want to believe. But I'd be interested to hear your ideas down below. How can humans use orcs' psychic ability against them in a creative way that would work? Method number 7 is exterminatus. Yeah, sometimes you just have to blow an orc-infested world up. I feel for the soldiers of the Imperium back in the day of the Great Crusade. They'd have to meet orcs in battle on the ground. A standard strategy for taking out orcs back then was hollowing, as in to go after the energy cores which power Ork planets. The Goro hollowing is a famous example of this. The scrap world of Goro was the heart of the Ork Empire, which stretched across the Telon Reach. A group of mech boys, odd boys who specialized in developing tech, dominated the planet, on which they innovated all sorts of plasma technology. Thus, the Emperor decided that Goro had to be eliminated. However, to take the planet out, he had to lead a full-scale invasion of the planet. Led by the Luna Wolves, a massive Imperial force descended upon Goro, with the wolves themselves teleporting beneath the planet's surface, where they battled through thousands of orcs of all species as they worked their way along with the Emperor to the self-sustaining plasma sphere at the center. The Emperor and his forces successfully collapsed the core, and Goro imploded into the warp. Needless to say, given that the Emperor of Mankind struggled mightily during this conflict, hollowing is not a great strategy for the Imperium to employ against orcs. So one would hope that in the 42nd millennium and onward, that mankind would opt for exterminatus first. Method number 8 is special forces. There are two types of special Imperial soldiers who seem to work especially well against orcs. The first are Terminators. Terminators are Space Marine veterans who have earned the right to wear tactical dreadnought armor, better known as just Terminator armor, which turns its wielder into a walking super tank. Terminator armor maintains the technological abilities of standard power armor while also boasting the ability to withstand unstable environments, namely orc worlds, which are layered in all sorts of noxious and corrosive elements, and as we mentioned before, plasma. Terminator armor also has built-in teleportation tech, which allows its wearer to instantly transport to anywhere on or under a planetary surface. Another plus when facing orcs, as much of orc production goes on underground. It was Terminators from the Luna Wolves Space Marine chapter who played an integral role in helping the Imperium achieve victory over the Ork Empire of Uruk during the Ulanor Crusade in the 30th millennium. The second type of Imperial soldiers who have often been employed successfully against orcs are assassins, specifically assassins from the Vindicare Temple, who are known to be the most skilled snipers in the Imperium. In year 987 of the 41st millennium, Orc warlord Azdaka was unleashing a devastating though that's a bit redundant, across the Hellshrieky systems, ravaging world after world and massacring population after population. In response, the Imperium sent a Vindicare assassin to take out Azdaka and his underling Knobs. The assassin drifted from battlefield to battlefield across the Hellshrieky system, lurking in the shadows and taking down some of the most important and powerful orcs in Azdaka's employ. This, of course, sincerely pissed off Azdaka, and so he put a large bounty on the assassin's head, but the assassin put a bullet in Azdaka's first. The heroic assassin was caught by the orcs shortly after, but his mission was fulfilled, and his death glorious. Method number 9 is distract the orcs with another enemy. As I mentioned before, and repeatedly really, orcs aren't very clever, and they're liable to be duped and manipulated. It'd be easy enough to gather them all together and get them to engage in civil war. However, that's not even necessary. The Imperium can also just divert them into the Eldar or Tyranids. Orcs love to fight, and they're not going to pass up the opportunity for a good battle, even if a battle distracts from a larger objective, which is itself usually just to make war anyway. One may recall the time in the late 41st millennium, year 982, when Orc freebooter, as in pirate, Dokbod Firegut and his boys harpooned a vessel in the void and dragged it back to their base. Unfortunately for them, the vessel was actually a living creature, or specifically a Tyranid bioship, which then unleashed a horde of Tyranids on the Orc's base. Okay, actually none of this was unfortunate for anyone, I suppose. The Tyranids got to feed, the Orcs got the pleasure of engaging in a protracted battle against a worthy enemy, and the humans got to stay out of it all. Yeah, so the Imperium should lead Tyranid bioships into Orc territory whenever and wherever possible. This leads us to method number 10, our final method. Get the Orcs swept up in a hell war. First off, there's no easier Xeno race to lead into the warp than the Orcs, who will go wherever the fight is. In year 982 of the 41st millennium, Orc war boss Zagstruck, enraged at being outmaneuvered by some wild riders, followed these jet-bike riding Eldari into the warp, and wasn't seen for 10 solar months. Actually, I'm not sure he ever stopped chasing down Eldari after that, which by the way supports the viability of the previous suggested method of distracting the Orkz with another enemy. But the point here is that getting the Orkz into the warp doesn't require very complex planning. Just piss them off and head for Immaterium. However, being that Orkz, as just demonstrated, are liable to get locked in battle for extended periods of time, the ideal here is not only to get Orkz into the warp, but to then have them end up engaging in battle with the demonic entities of this hellish realm. Here, we might think all the way back to year 344 of the 41st millennium, when Orc warlord Tuska the Demon Killer took a liking to battling demons, as his name implies, and led a "Wah!" into the Eye of Terror, where he and his forces unleashed hell on hell, attacking one demon world after another. It's said that eventually Tuska and his army were transported to Khorne's realm, where they fight against his demonic forces for all eternity, dying over and over again to the great amusement of the Chaos God of War himself. All of the Xeno races in 40k are pretty daunting, but the Tyranids are an especially fearsome foe for a number of reasons. First, there's no negotiating with Tyranids. They're here to eat whatever and whoever, and they want nothing else. Not money, not power, not fame, they just want to eat. Second, numbers. Their hordes are limitless, and given their rate of reproduction, for every Tyranid that falls in battle, many more rise simultaneously. So how the hell can the humans in 40k beat this seemingly insurmountable infestation? Well, there may be no perfect answer, but here are 7 ways that may work. Method number 1 is Necrons. As you all know, I believe, and everyone should believe, that the Necrons are by far the most powerful race in 40k, and possibly even in all of sci-fi. So it may be necessary for the humans to turn to the Necrons for help in this situation. However, as I pointed out in the video I did on how to beat the Necrons, it's really never good to get the Necrons fighting because, well, they're space titans, and so a Necron war of any sort means that weapons of devastating power would be unleashed on the galaxy, and humans could end up caught in the middle of that. So I'm not really too keen on asking the Necrons to fight the Tyranids, or even to hope that they come to do so on their own. However, what may be an option a la the Necrons is for humans to start the process of replacing their organic bodies with machine ones, as with the Necrons and their necrodermis coils. Obviously, it may be hard for humans to obtain necrodermis, being that they don't have the godly power to create such an immortal substance. However, the Adeptus Mechanicus, if it's good for anything, could at least try to create something more durable, or rather less appetizing, aka organic, than the current human form. This would eliminate humans from the Tyranid food pyramid, and we'd all get to sit back and watch the Horde feast on other organic Xenos, like the Tau. I mean, would you miss the Tau? Would you? I'm just saying. Now, you may think that this method is a joke, but it's not. The reason the Tyranids seem so hard to beat with conventional strategies is because conventional strategies probably won't work. The Tyranids are too overpowered of an alien race, and so desperate last resort measures are needed in order to survive them. Speaking of which, method number 2 is wipe out the galaxy. You all know this option has to be considered, especially those of you with Halo experience, specifically in regard to the Flood and the Halo array. As is obvious, building and firing off some sort of super weapon capable of eliminating all organic life in the galaxy in one fell swoop would eliminate the Tyranids' food source in the galaxy and all Tyranids within the galaxy as well. Thus, no extrasolar Tyranids, as scientists have theorized that Tyranids originated beyond the Milky Way, would have reason to migrate to the Milky Way. However, if you're sitting there saying, well, wouldn't killing all humans be kind of counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish here? Well, yes, this is more of a save the galaxy itself from complete corruption option rather than a save humanity one. I'm not for it, but I could foresee this being a reasonable last resort strategy if it involved storing at least some human DNA or dormant human life somewhere before the superweapon is fired so that the human race can be repopulated at a later time, which would then invite the Tyranids back eons down the line and back to square one. Let's move on. Method number 3 is to take the Tyranids out in a fairly conventional space war. The Tyranids do have a fleet, albeit more of a bioorganic one, and travel across the galaxy not so unlike any other Xeno navy. I mean, yes, their navy together is more of a superorganism and can be seen as a single entity in separate parts, but it is nonetheless made up of biomechanical ships centered around massive hive ships. I don't really think it's too difficult to outthink and outstrategize the Tyranid fleet. They don't really have anything in the way of creative tactics. They just cast down the shadow in the warp and send their armies to feast. However, here's the thing. Just like individual Tyranid bioforms, Their ships are innumerable as well, and presumably can be reproduced quite rapidly, as they too are Tyranid organisms. Humans don't stand a chance at withstanding the Tyranids' numbers, and that goes for their ships as well. Late in the 41st millennium, sometime in the year 993, Hive Fleet Kraken appeared in the galaxy, split its Hive Fleet into countless smaller fleets, and had each fleet overrun a star system before the Space Marines could finish their lunch. So I think no go on a direct void confrontation. So we move on to method number 4, which is lead the Tyranids to a different food source. Again, the Tyranids are an extrasolar species. They go where the food goes, and presumably they go where the most amount of food goes, and maybe even wherever the strongest food sources go, given the way they adapt the traits of ingested species into their hive. It's actually possible, probably, to get all Tyranids to move towards another food source at once. After all, they do operate by hive mind. So where the hive mind says to go, the swarm goes. That said, this is more of a temporary solution than anything else really, and could result in even worse consequences because the longer the Tyranids live, the stronger they get. To illuminate what I mean, take the example of the events that took place in year 997 of the 41st millennium. Amidst a battle with Imperial forces, the Tyranid swarm was deflected to an Orkz star system. The Orkz held off the Tyranids for a while, but eventually the bugs overwhelmed them and emerged from the experience an even more terrifying foe, as they now had absorbed Ork genetic material into their hive. Yikes. Though, consequently, following this absorption, Tyranid SAT scores dropped significantly. Method number 5 is create planet traps. When the Tyranids show up on a planet, one thing is for certain. They are going to eat all life in the vicinity. But while the Tyranid appetite makes them a rather uncompromising enemy, their predictability in this regard can be used against them. What humans could do is track the Tyranids' movements and poison planets that their hordes are set to invade. I mean, said planets are doomed anyway. I wouldn't glass said planets with the Tyranids on it because, well, the Tyranids can always replenish their ranks, but poison could have a widespread deleterious effect on the hive mind. Or they'll just create poison-spewing bioforms. I don't know. In any case, I don't really think this method would work very well because I'll bet the Tyranids, feral as they are, would be able to sense something amiss in their meal, though dogs and cats eat stuff they shouldn't all the time, so I don't know, maybe this plan could work. Method number 6 is subvert the hive mind, and this is truly our first interesting proposal here. We kind of hinted at this in the last method, and this strategy should have become obvious to you by now. The best way to take down the Tyranids is to take down the brain that powers them. After all, that all Tyranids are psychically linked and are biologically bonded to a hive mind is as great a weakness as it is a strength. So how do humans take down the hive mind? Should they bust into a hive ship, barrel towards the center, and slay the Norn Queen at the core? Well, this is probably not a great plan of action given the billions, trillions, or whatever ungodly number of beasts the humans are gonna have to face to get to the Norn Queen. Think of bees protecting their queen. It ain't easy to get to her. However, the Norn Queen is probably going to have to factor into our plan here. If you aren't aware, Norn Queens are highly intelligent Tyranid bioforms who sit at the center of hive ships and direct the evolutionary path of the swarm. In other words, all Tyranids have links back to a Norn Queen, who they send genetic material to from the battlefield. The Norn Queens then basically decide what to do with the genetic material. They actually argue amongst one another psychically as to how best to use the ingested genetic material and how best to adapt the entire hive. Thus, I don't think our plan here is going to be as simple as get Tyranid combat units to ingest disease-plagued genetic material and send it back to the hive ships. I suspect that the queens would be able to pick out faulty genetic material and eliminate it from the pool of material to be distributed across the Tyranid ranks. Therefore, humans would need to plan a bit smarter here. They'd need to develop a Trojan horse gene, perhaps some genetic material that appears to offer great strength to those who absorb it, but actually is built to degrade any species that does. Perhaps the genetic material in question would cause the Tyranids to go crazy and feast upon their own. Funny enough, this is actually what the Imperium's forces did the one time on record that they encountered a Norn Queen. During the Battle of Tarsus Ultra in year 999 of the 41st millennium, the Imperium scientists created a gene poison or a biological plague which Space Marine Captain Uriel Ventress injected into the Norn Queen, breaking the Tyranids' link to their hive mind, which caused them to go insane and feast on each other. The Space Marines' actions during Tarsus Ultra were heroic, and effectively disabled a significant part of Hive Fleet Leviathan. However, I don't think that the Imperium can expect to be able to get close enough to Norn Queens on a regular basis in order to repeat this plan enough times to cripple the Tyranids. Instead, as I was getting at before, they need to create an insidious gene poison that can be fed from grunts on the battlefield back to the hive. Next, method number 7 is capture an alpha wave Tyranid bioform. When the Tyranids arrive over a planet, the process of stripping the entire world of its biomass is a fairly quick affair. However, there is a series of steps this process involves. The first thing the swarm does is unleash their alpha swarm, the bioforms of which contain the genetic material of their particular Hive Fleet's Norn Queen. It's these alpha Tyranids who relay information about the planet's environmental conditions and battlefield requirements back to the Queen, who then spawns subsequent waves of bioforms better adapted for consuming the planet at hand. However, if an alpha wave bioform is captured, the consumption sequence is disrupted, leading to the creation of a neurotoxin which stands a chance of killing the Queen. This is what the Ultramarines experienced during the invasion of Ultramar by Hive Fleet Behemoth. In that case, the neurotoxin did indeed kill the Hive Queen and break the hive mind. However, as a result of the Queen's death, Tyranid hive ships began to split apart and produce more ships and more Norn Queens, this being a survival mechanism known as the Hydra effect. This is again why I think my previous proposal, an insidious malicious gene that poisons the entire hive before anyone notices, is the best way to go. Next, method number 8 is to develop and implement anti-psychic technology. As we've already alluded to throughout this script, the Tyranids are psychically linked to one another. They are of a single consciousness, and in that way are one massive entity rather than an ecosystem of trillions of individual beings. Kind of like if you could detach your arm and control it telepathically. It's due to their psychic powers that the Tyranids are able to remain organized and carry out targeted invasions at all. As we demonstrated in the last couple methods, if their psychic bond is disrupted, the Tyranid superorganism breaks down into individual feral beasts with no awareness or complex thoughts. Thus, impeding upon their telepathic link may be a good way to beat them. The downside, of course, is that you'd now have Tyranids running amok throughout the galaxy, but this is probably a preferred outcome to their hordes targeting specific planets and star systems for consumption. As with the former option, they stand the chance of killing off each other, and additionally, breaking their psychic bond also means they can no longer adapt traits and grow stronger as a collective unit. Obviously, the example I brought up in method number 6 involved a valiant Space Marine captain breaking this psychic bond through a gene poison. However, the Imperium should instead probably attempt to develop some sort of technology capable of blocking Tyranid psychic power from a distance. Of course, figuring out the science that would make this work is easier said than done. Finally, method number 9 is use the warp. Now, when we covered the Necrons, we discussed how trapping them in Immaterium may be the best bet when it comes to trying to destroy them. However, I can't recommend this strategy for the Tyranids because there's no organic food in the warp really, so it's going to be hard to convince the hive to enter the warp. Additionally, they don't need to enter the warp for superluminal travel thanks to the Narval, a specially evolved hive ship that allows Tyranids to manipulate the gravity fields of star systems in order to achieve FTL travel. However, and go with me here, a warp rift, or rather a controlled warp rift, may be a way to use hell against them. Now, I'm being kind of facetious when I say controlled warp rift, but nonetheless I am indeed proposing letting the demons of that hellish realm break free into real space. Why? Because doing so corrupts the Tyranid food supply. Sometime in the latter days of the 41st millennium, the entities of the warp broke free into real space via a tear in reality, and the ensuing warp storms unleashed chaos on the galaxy. The supernatural evils that blanketed the Milky Way galaxy wreaked havoc on many of its worlds and populations therein. However, during this event, known as the Great Rift, the Tyranid hive mind went hungry. The immaterial entities of the warp and psychic energy they emanate corrupted the very worlds that Tyranids needed for sustenance. Short a source of biomass, the Tyranids suffered losses, and their growth was slowed. That said, they eventually adapted new organisms capable of feeding in such circumstances, but still it seems that if humans are willing to unleash devastating chaos in the galaxy in order to stop the Tyranids, then a warp rift may be a viable option. After all, it is a less extreme last resort tactic than wiping out all life in the galaxy with a Halo Array-esque superweapon. Method number 1. Wrist control. Gain wrist control. Just kidding, their wrists can phase out of your grasp. The real number 1, innovation. No, this isn't a strategy in and of itself, but we can't go any further in this video without discussing human technological shortcomings in 40K. Perhaps the greatest threat to the human empire in the 40K universe is the fact that the Imperium's technology has been stagnant for thousands of years. The Adeptus Mechanicus has no idea how the weapons and tech in the Imperium's employ works. They just know that it does. Sometimes. And so it's silly of me to even try to have a discussion about taking on the Necrons in combat if the Imperium doesn't figure out a way to spur innovation throughout its domain. Necron ships are incredibly capable. They can transport themselves to anywhere in the galaxy in an instant using their inertialess drives, and are outfitted with a stunningly powerful array of energy weapons. Then on the ground, the Necrons also carry the most advanced gear known in the Milky Way galaxy. Their Gauss weapons break apart the atomic bonds of their targets on impact, and that's nothing. They have weapons like the Ionic Orb, which is basically a star bomb. And then if that's not enough, they have the Catan Star Gods. Watch the previous video I did on the Necrons if you need a breakdown of what these are, but shorthand, the Necrons have space Pokemon, all at the level of Mewtwo or better. So again, it's a huge problem that the Imperium's technology isn't improving at a significant rate because the difference between their tech and that of certain Xeno races is staggering. Method number 2, don't fight them. Yeah, I know that this prescription makes it sound like there's no point to this video, but I'm serious. I want to make an accurate list here. I don't want to just come up with cool answers for the sake of telling you what you want to hear. Did you not listen to that preview I just offered of all the godlike weapons the Necrons have at their disposal? Oh, not enough to scare you? Well, they can also phase. Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, the Necrons can just teleport to destinations in space-time as they wish. So really, any sensible strategy for defeating them would not include taking them on in battle. The humans would lose that fight easily. I know that some people actually point to Necron battle tactics as a weakness, as their strategies are somewhat predictable and uncreative. But my question to the people who raise this point is, what's the endgame? How exactly does this bode well for humans trying to emerge victorious in battle versus the Necrons? You can predict their tactics all day, but they're still going to win. The dynamic I'm trying to describe here is akin to how pretty people sometimes don't develop the best sense of humor because they simply don't need to be funny in order to get by in life. So yeah, think about it. The Necrons can probably defeat any faction in 40K in head-to-head battle, maybe even any faction in all of science fiction. Method number 3 is keep them asleep. As you may know, tens of millions of years ago, after wiping out the Old Ones and enslaving the Catan in an epic galactic god war, the Necrons were collectively depleted, and so they erected tomb worlds throughout the galaxy and hibernated there for 60 million years, waiting out better days. Now obviously it's nearly impossible for the humans to force the Necrons to stay asleep. Though what I can advise is that humans should take more care to watch out for tomb worlds as they navigate the galaxy. It's predicted that many settled human worlds actually house dormant Necrons beneath their surface, and thus the peoples living there stand a chance of disturbing them from their slumber. Humans should thus take precautions when founding new worlds, and possibly even try to develop tech that enables them to detect a Necron presence within a planet's crust. Crust. This brings us to method number 4, destroy Necron tomb worlds. The Necrons are heavily dependent on their tomb worlds, not just for hibernation and recuperation, but also because they use them as grounds to repair their weapons and technology. The Imperium could take a shot at this strategy. They could locate as many tomb worlds as possible where Necrons are dormant, and then in a sweeping operation bombard them all into oblivion. If successful, I imagine the Necrons would find themselves in collective disrepair. However, this method is more of a suggestion I've seen offered up by Imperial subjects on the Emperor's interwebs, rather than one I'd advocate for myself. Why am I against this strategy? Well, it poses too big of a risk. I have confidence that humans could blow up these planets, but one mistake could mean the extinction of humanity. And a mistake is likely because it's not like the Necrons have left their tomb worlds unguarded. On the contrary, they are defended by all sorts of hellish wraiths and robots that alone could deal devastating outcomes unto humanity. So it's not like an Imperial Navy battle fleet could just pull up on a tomb world and lay it to waste unimpeded. And again, this strategy could very well lead to the already stupendously powerful Necrons waking up grumpy. And this brings us to method number 5, trap them. As we've discussed already, the Necrons are not surmountable in a head-to-head fight. They have all the weapons, tech, abilities, and Pokemon we mentioned earlier, and additionally, they're kind of immortal, so attempting to kill them is a fairly futile endeavor. Simply said, they don't bleed their own blood. Back during their war with the Old Ones, the Catan transformed the Necrontyrs' bodies into machines made up of necrodermis, a living metal that is nearly immune to damage and can heal and regenerate when damaged. Necrons can actually reassemble themselves after having been reduced to atoms, so no go on turning their Gauss weapons on them. But I digress. Killing the Necrons off is not a feasible strategy, but figuring out a way to trap and sedate them is a more promising idea. What the Imperium could do is attempt to study an abandoned tomb world, if there is one out there, and from what they learn, perhaps attempt to fashion some sort of Necron tomb of their own, within which they can imprison captured Necrons and put them to sleep. Now, the problem with this plan is that it'd be hard to pull off on a significant number of Necrons. And then, of course, if the humans are successful in imprisoning a good amount of them, the brethren of the captured may become, to use layman's terms, pissed off. And then finally, in the first place, if the humans can't even figure out their own tech, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to grasp what the Necrons have going on. Next up is method number 6. Use the Force. Nope, wait, sorry. Vaccine delirium is kicking in. That's use the Warp. The Necrons would eat the Jedi alive. One of the Necrons' biggest advantages, aside from, well, everything, is the fact that they don't have to traverse the warp to achieve FTL travel, as they have the mysterious inertialess drives installed on their ships that we mentioned earlier. It stands to reason that if no form of organic life can defeat the Necrons, then perhaps it's best to turn to the ethereal entities of the warp. Actually, this is probably our best strategy yet. If the Imperium can somehow lead the Necrons into the warp, which isn't so unthinkable given the warp's spread across the galaxy, then it's possible to wipe them out. The trick here is galvanizing enough of the Necrons to fall for the trap to make a dent in their ranks, so the humans are probably going to have to do this during some sort of large-scale invasion, preferably at the beginning of hostilities before the Imperium suffers mass casualties. Though, this is 40k, so let's not pretend like that really matters. Of course, as the Necrons don't ever enter the warp, chances are they won't fare too well in there. As crazy as it sounds, humans may actually have an advantage on the Necrons and Immaterium because they have some experience in this demonic realm. Additionally, humans employ the use of psychers to navigate the warp, whereas Necrons have no native psychers. While I don't think this shortcoming makes much of a difference for Necrons in real space, in the warp they would find themselves in trouble without a psychic guide. Next, method number 7 is goad the Necrons into internecine conflict. Despite their collective power, the Necron Empire is highly fractured. Following the self-exile of Zarek, the Necron Silent King and former ruling triarch of the ancient Necrontyr Empire, the state of the Necron power hierarchy fell into disorder as Zarek left no clear line of succession with his abdication. Thus, a struggle persists among Necron dynasties and nobles to claim power over the Necron Empire. I think most Imperial scholars will tell you that if push comes to shove, the Necrons will unite. But it's not so far-fetched to think that external forces could manipulate them into civil war, especially given how individualistic Necron nobles are. Thus, this method may be a viable strategy for decimating the Necron ranks. However, I think this is a bad idea for the same reason that on Earth today it wouldn't necessarily be desirable for the government of major powers, or any powers really, to collapse, even if the government in question is generally viewed as malicious and averse to international norms. The chaos caused by such a collapse could lead to worse outcomes for the rest of the world than if said government were to remain stable. If the Necrons fell to civil war, what power structure does exist among their empire could collapse, and the various deadly weapons they possess could fall into the wrong hands, or worse, the Necrons could simply start unleashing said firepower on each other. After all, what else should we expect of a Necron-on-Necron war? In a war amongst Titans, the Titans aren't going to be careful to not obliterate weaker races that come into the crossfire. Thus, the Imperium should hope that a Necron civil war never comes to pass, for the effects could be catastrophic for the galaxy. Next, method number 8 is turn the Necrons' weapons against them. This is another strategy I've seen proposed by Imperial subjects around the Milky Way wide web. I don't mean to suggest that humans should try to wield Gauss weapons. Instead, what I'm looking to exploit is the fact that the Necrons actually don't have total control over their so-called arms. The Catan Star Gods, for instance, are likely not happy to be enslaved by the Necrons, and given the chance would probably break free and launch an uprising against them. The Necrons also employ armies of robots as well, which too pose a threat of rebellion. And Necron robots are not like any other machines in the galaxy. They're nearly as deadly as the Necrons themselves. Thus, if these robots and the Catan could be freed from servitude and set upon their masters, well, we may have a decent fight on our hands. Once again, though, the issue is with the chaos that would result and come to affect humans as well. After defeating the Necrons, the Catan Star Gods could go on to conquer the galaxy or even destroy it. This brings us to method number 9, Tyranids. This is another popular strategy for defeating the Necrons that I've seen around His Holiness's internet. Unleash the swarm on them. Now, I know that some people believe that the Tyranids can actually rival the Necrons in battle, especially because the Necrons' infantry units move kind of slow and predictably on the ground. You know, until they phase to wherever they want. Yeah, let me respond to the idea that the Tyranids can beat the Necrons in battle. No. Sorry, the Necrons would destroy the Tyranids if we're obeying the lore. However, that's not to say that the Tyranids couldn't serve as a distraction for the Necrons. As the swarm sixths its overwhelming and actually infinite numbers on the Necrons, the humans could move in for a strike. That said, this disobeys our earlier prescription to never fight the Necrons. Eventually, the Necrons would stave off the Tyranids, at least until the next horde rises, and then destroy the humans who bothered them. And anyway, what if the Tyranids did defeat the Necrons? Fresh on the heels of that epic victory, they'd overrun the galaxy. Again, this method would be set hell on everyone. Or not hell, because that actually exists in 40k, but a bad outcome. Finally, we have method number 10, seize the Celestial Orrery. Yes, we have to consider the Necrons' ultimate weapon here. And this is just a reminder of how OP the Necrons are. Their star bombs and god shards aren't even their best weapons. The celestial orrery, located on the planet Thanatos, where it is overseen by the Necron-Orusker dynasty, is basically a hologram of the entire galaxy. And when the Necrons alter a spot on this hologram, the spot's corresponding location in real space changes in accordance with the alteration. In other words, this is the Necrons' Play God device. By flicking a spot on the orrery, it can cause a star to go supernova. Or, they can just destroy entire star systems in an instant. Thus, if the humans focus a surprise attack on the Orusker dynasty, well, they could use the orrery to wipe out all of the Necrons in the galaxy before the Necron armies could react. That said, here's my question. Is it a good idea for humans to control the orrery? Wouldn't we rather have a more powerful race like the Necrons oversee it? After all, the Necrons have seemingly been fairly restrained when it comes to the orrery. It's hard to tell if they've used it or not, but certainly they haven't used it to wipe out humanity. Therefore, the orrery may be safer in their hands. What would happen if humans controlled it and the Orkz attacked the location the orrery was being housed in and successfully took it over? They'd probably just start randomly mashing buttons. Put aside the fact that humans themselves may not even be as restrained as the Necrons when it comes to using the orrery, they simply aren't strong enough to be able to oversee it safely. Anyway, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of all of these strategies. Remember to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a damn thing. For now, my name is American Ben, and I'll catch you next time. Generation Films, peace.